There is a question that sits at the center of this story, and it is worth holding on to from the first moment. Why would a person spend 8 years collecting something everyone else was throwing away? Why would she load it into a wheelbarrow before dawn, haul it across a frozen field, and spread it in rows so precise that her neighbor once asked if she had used a surveying instrument? The answer is not complicated, but it took 8 years for anyone to believe her, and another 3 for anyone to admit she had been right all along. Her name was Delia Marsh, and she ran 6 acres of marginal land outside a mid-sized city in the upper Midwest, on ground that had spent 40 years absorbing the runoff from a decommissioned rail yard before anyone thought to test the soil. The tests, when they came, were not encouraging. The pH was wrong. The organic matter content was so low the extension agent handed her a pamphlet as though it were a consolation prize. The pamphlet explained what good soil looked like. Her soil did not look like that. The extension agent was kind about it in the manner of a doctor delivering a prognosis he considers obvious. He told her she might think about selling and moving somewhere more hospitable. He said it gently. She thanked him and put the pamphlet on the kitchen table and did not look at it again. What she looked at instead was a notebook her grandfather had kept between 1951 and 1973, recording his observations as a night janitor at an agricultural research station in Iowa. He had not been a scientist. He had been a man who mopped floors and listened. And what he had heard in those years, standing quietly in doorways while researchers argued over slides and test results, had gone into the notebook in a careful, slanted hand. He wrote about carbon. He wrote about the way depleted ground responded to different kinds of carbonaceous material depending on fineness of particle, moisture content, and the speed at which the material broke down. He wrote a sentence that Delia had read so many times she had long since stopped needing to look at it. The sentence said this: "What the earth cannot use quickly, it saves." She read that sentence in March of the first year, sitting at the kitchen table beside the pamphlet she had not opened. Then she drove to the commercial coffee roasting facility 2 miles up the county road and knocked on the loading dock door. The roasting facility processed between 4 and 6 tons of green coffee beans every week. The roasting process produces a byproduct called chaff, the silver skin of the coffee bean, which separates during the drum roasting phase and is collected in a cyclone separator before being compacted into sacks or simply dumped. It is light, papery, faintly combustible, and it smells like the memory of coffee rather than coffee itself. Most facilities paid a small tipping fee to have it carted to a compost yard 40 minutes away. The operations manager, a man named Gerald Prout, was happy to hear of an alternative disposal arrangement. He could have her fence line, he said. He could have whatever she wanted. He asked if she needed a contract drawn up. She said no contract was necessary. She said she would take it all. Gerald Prout watched her drive away in a truck that needed a new muffler and made a mental note to enjoy the free disposal arrangement for as long as it lasted, which he estimated at perhaps 6 weeks. That was April of the first year. Delia was 39 years old. The fence line he had offered her ran 260 feet along the west edge of her property, where the roasting facility's delivery trucks turned around. By the end of the first month, she had expanded the arrangement to include a second drop zone near her east barn. By the end of the third month, she had negotiated a similar arrangement with a small batch roaster in the city that had previously been paying $80 a month for chaff removal. She did not charge either of them a pickup fee. She did not explain her reasoning to either of them beyond saying she had a use for it. What she did with it was this. She ran the chaff through a rented tub grinder to break the particles further, then blended it at a ratio she had worked out through a reading of her grandfather's notebook, cross-referenced with 3 peer-reviewed papers on carbon-to-nitrogen ratios and high woody residue amendments that she had obtained through the State University Extension Library by sending a handwritten letter requesting access. The ratio was not the obvious one. The obvious one, the one that appeared in most home composting guides, was 30 parts carbon to 1 part nitrogen. Her grandfather's notes pointed toward a narrower band for this specific class of fine carbonaceous material, somewhere between 18 and 22 to 1, and she worked at the higher end of that range to account for the residual acidity of the post-roast chaff, which she had tested herself using a meter she bought secondhand for $40. She spread the blended material in rows across the worst section of the 6 acres and left it. The neighbors saw the rows and formed conclusions. Her closest neighbor to the north, a retired civil engineer named Patterson, came over the first autumn and stood at her fence line with his hands in his pockets. He said she had a lot of rubbish on her property. He said it with real neighborly concern, which is to say he said it twice. She told him she was amending the soil. He nodded slowly in the way that people nod when they have decided not to argue with someone they have categorized as harmless. He said he hoped it worked out and walked back to his truck. She watched him go and then went back to the rows. In the second year, the extension agent returned for an unrelated visit about a county water table monitoring program and walked across the amended section with her. He stopped at one point and crouched and picked up a handful of the blended material and turned it over. He said it was interesting that she was using coffee processing waste. He said that composted coffee grounds had shown some promise in acidic soil applications, though the research was mixed and she should be careful not to over-acidify. He did not look at the pH meter results she offered to show him. He said she could send them along in an email if she wanted. He was gentle about it in the same manner as before. He said it was good that she was trying things. She thanked him and put her pH results back in the folder. The third year was when the city council 2 miles north decided to invest in what the planning documents called a green space revitalization corridor, which was a phrase that meant they were converting 4 blocks of underutilized commercial land into managed green space using a subcontracted landscaping firm out of the state capital. The firm used a bagged mulch product manufactured in Missouri. The mulch was dark and finely textured and smelled pleasantly of bark, and it cost the city $47,000 for the initial installation. The subcontractor's project manager gave an interview to the local paper in which he praised the product's consistency and said that proper ground preparation was the foundation of any sustainable green space. The paper ran a photo of the project manager in a hard hat standing next to a pallet of bagged mulch. Delia read the article at the kitchen table. She set it down and went outside. The rows were doing something now. The soil in the amended sections had darkened measurably. The particle structure was changing in a way she could feel when she pressed 2 fingers into it and turned her wrist. Her grandfather had written about this sensation. He had called it the give. He had written that when depleted ground begins to accept amendment properly, you can feel it change under your hand like bread dough accepting warmth, and that when you feel that, you are not imagining things. You are reading something true. She felt it. She was not imagining things. The difficult part of that third year was not the soil. The difficult part was the phone call from her sister in Columbus, who had heard from their mother that Delia was still collecting trash from the coffee factory. Her sister said the word trash, and then immediately walked it back and said she meant waste material. And then she said she just worried. She just wanted to know that Delia was all right, that she was not spinning her wheels out there, that she was managing her finances, that the property taxes were current. Her sister's voice had that particular warmth that contains within it a structural assumption that the person being spoken to has failed in some important way. Delia told her the taxes were current. Her sister said she was glad. Her sister said she was always there if Delia needed anything, and that she should not be too proud to ask. Delia thanked her and said goodbye and stood in the kitchen for a moment, listening to the quiet. Then she walked out to where a young woman named Rosario Venn was waiting with a second-hand screener they had borrowed from a landscape supply yard on the other side of the county. Rosario had appeared in the second year. She had been hiking a trail that ran along the creek at the far edge of Delia's property and had paused at the fence to watch Delia working the tub grinder alone in a cloud of chaff dust. She had watched for about 10 minutes without speaking. Then she had asked what the particle size target was. Delia had told her. Rosario had looked at the output from the grinder and said it was running a little coarse and asked if she could adjust the screen. Delia had handed her the wrench. They had worked for the rest of that afternoon without talking much, and when the light failed, Rosario had said she would come back Saturday if that was all right. That had been Saturday of the second year. It was now the third, and Rosario was there most weekends, and had begun keeping her own notes, and had once brought a paper she had found in a horticulture journal about the thermal properties of fine particulate mulch layers in suppressing soil moisture evaporation, which she had highlighted in 3 colors and paper-clipped to a page in Delia's grandfather's notebook at the entry where he had written about the same phenomenon in different words. The entry said, "A thin roof of the right material keeps the house below from sweating." They did not talk much about the future. They talked about ratios, about moisture content, about the behavior of the material in cold versus warm decomposition. Rosario had a day job at a tile warehouse and knew about stacking tolerances and material movement, and she applied this thinking to the problem of moving large quantities of chaff efficiently across uneven ground. By the end of the third year, they had developed a handling system using a modified pallet arrangement that reduced the labor time per ton by about 30%. They did not tell anyone about this. In the fourth year, Gerald Prout retired and was replaced by a new operations manager at the roasting facility who reviewed the disposal arrangement and considered renegotiating it for a small monthly fee. He sent Delia a letter suggesting $50 a month. She wrote back and said she would accept that arrangement for a period of 18 months, after which she would need to reconsider, as she had other offers pending. She did not have other offers pending. She had 2 other roasters who had inquired about disposal arrangements but had not committed. The new operations manager wrote back to say they would hold at 0 charge for the time being, given her long-standing relationship with the facility. She wrote back, thanking him. She was 42 that year. Rosario was 27. They had, by that point, amended slightly over 4 of the 6 acres. The soil in the oldest sections had changed enough that Delia had called the extension office and requested a new test, which she paid for herself at the standard rate of $32. The results showed a pH of 6.3, which was within range for most broadleaf planting. The organic matter content had risen from its original 0.7% to 4.1%. The agent who processed the test results called to confirm the plot location, as the improvement was outside normal parameters for a 4-year window without significant external input. Delia told him the inputs had been chaff-based amendments, processed on site. The agent said that was very interesting and asked her to email the amendment logs. She emailed him 43 pages of records she had kept since the first month. He did not respond. She did not follow up. By the 5th year, she had a product. It had not been planned as a product. It had been planned as a soil correction strategy for 6 acres of damaged ground. But the material she was producing, the blended, twice-processed, carefully seasoned amendment that she and Rosario had been refining for 4 years, was a finished mulch. It was not chaff anymore, and it was not compost, and it was not bark mulch, and it was not any of the 47 products listed in the regional landscape supply catalog she had picked up at a garden center in April. It was a fine, dark, stable, low pH-adjusted carbonaceous mulch with a moisture retention profile she had documented in a series of bucket tests she had run over 2 consecutive summers, and the numbers were better than anything she had seen in the literature for materials in its price class, which was to say the price class of free raw material plus labor. She priced the first batch at $18 for a 40-pound bag. Patterson from the north fence came over and looked at the bags stacked against the barn wall and said she was underselling. He said a comparable product from the Missouri company cost the city $22 a bag and had inferior particle consistency, which he knew because his brother-in-law was on the Parks Commission and he had seen the installation specs. Delia looked at him for a moment. It was the first time he had said anything useful. She thanked him. She raised the price to $20, and then, when the first local nursery agreed to carry the product on consignment, she raised it to $22. The nursery sold 11 bags in the first month. She had expected 6. In the 6th year, 2 landscape supply distributors approached her. One was local and one was regional. The local distributor offered a standing order for 600 bags a month at a trade price of $14 a bag. The regional distributor offered a lower trade price but a larger minimum and a contract that included a non-compete clause covering a four-county area. Delia read both contracts at the kitchen table. She called Rosario and they went through the regional contract together, and Rosario found the non-compete clause and read it aloud and said it was wide. Delia said yes. She signed with the local distributor and did not return the regional distributor's follow-up calls. She was 44 that year. She had 600 bags a month going to the local distributor and a smaller ongoing arrangement with 3 nurseries. The revenue from those arrangements was not enough to replace a full income, but it was enough to service the equipment loan they had taken out to buy a proper tub grinder, a screener, and a used conveyor that Rosario had located through an auction site for industrial equipment. Total equipment cost had been $41,000. They had financed $30,000 of it through a rural small business loan at a fixed rate, using the property as collateral. The monthly payment was $480. The annual revenue in the 6th year was $63,000. After the loan payment, the distributor margin, input costs, and Rosario's wages, Delia cleared $19,000. It was not a fortune. It was more than she had cleared from the property in any previous year. She put $12,000 of it back into a second equipment bay and paid off a water line repair she had deferred for 2 years. She kept the rest in an account she did not touch. In the 7th year, the City Council announced that it was expanding the Green Space Revitalization Corridor by 8 additional blocks. The subcontracted landscaping firm from the state capital submitted the first bid, as it had done before. The bid used the Missouri bagged mulch at the same per-bag price, which had risen to $24 due to fuel surcharges on the long-haul freight from Missouri. Patterson's brother-in-law, who was still on the Parks Commission, mentioned in the commission meeting that there was a local product that had been showing up in residential and commercial applications around the county, and that the commission might want to get a sample. The commission chair said they would be happy to look at alternatives if a formal sample and spec sheet were provided. No one contacted Delia. Patterson knocked on her door 2 days later and told her what had been said. She asked him what the timeline was. He said the bid process closed in 31 days. She thanked him and sat down at the table and wrote a spec sheet that evening, drawing the numbers from 5 years of bucket tests, pH logs, moisture retention records, and the 43 pages of amendment documentation she had sent to the Extension Office 2 years before, which no one had ever returned comment on. She submitted the spec sheet with a sample pallet to the City Purchasing Department 22 days before the deadline. Her price per bag was $21. The purchasing agent, a precise woman named Holt, sent a 2-line acknowledgement email and nothing else for 19 days. On the 20th day, she sent a request for a site visit. Delia and Rosario spent an afternoon showing her the operation. Holt walked the amended sections of the 6 acres, crouched and pressed 2 fingers into the soil in what looked to Delia like an instinctive gesture, stood back up, and wrote something in a small notebook. She did not say much during the visit. At the end of it, she shook both their hands and said she appreciated the transparency of the documentation and that she would be in touch. The city awarded the mulch contract to Delia's operation 14 days later. The initial order was for 9,000 bags to cover the 8-block expansion. At $21 a bag, the contract was worth $189,000. Holt's letter noted that the decision had been based on delivered cost, including freight savings from local sourcing, verified performance data, and the Commission's stated preference for purchasing from county-based businesses where specifications could be met. The letter did not mention the Missouri company or the original subcontractor. It did not need to. Delia read the letter twice. Then she read it a 3rd time. Then she set it on the table next to her grandfather's notebook and stood in the kitchen for a while. The figure she would later report to the state's small business registry in the filing year that covered the 8-month period between the city contract and 2 subsequent commercial accounts was $195,000 in gross revenue. The number in the video title and in the press summary that a regional business journal ran the following spring, $195,000, was the figure from that filing period. It was an accurate number, documented and filed. It was not the number she thought about when she thought about what the years had built. The number she thought about was 4.1, which was the organic matter content reading on ground that had started at 0.7. That was the number that had required 8 years. The money had required 14 days once someone read the spec sheet. The subcontractor from the state capitol called her the week after the award letter. He was a careful man, and he did not say anything intemperate. He said he thought she had done an excellent job on the documentation and asked if she had considered a regional expansion, because his firm had contacts in 3 other metro markets that he would be happy to make introductions in, given the quality of what she had put together. His voice was pleasant. It had in it a quality of reassessment that cost him something to project, and she could hear what it was costing him, and she felt no particular satisfaction from that. She thanked him and said she was focused on capacity in the current market and was not looking at regional expansion this year. He said he understood completely and to keep him in mind. She said she would. She did not call him back that year. What she did instead was this. She wrote up the amendment methodology, the ratios, the processing sequence, and the bucket test protocol in a 22-page document that she formatted carefully and printed on her home printer in an edition of 40 copies. She mailed one to the extension office, addressed to no one in particular. She left a stack of 10 at the county library's reference desk. She gave one to Patterson. She gave one to the operations manager at the roasting facility, who had by then been replaced a second time. She sent one to the small batch city roaster who had been giving her chaff for 7 years without understanding why. She sent one to the State University Extension Library, in care of the collections desk, with a handwritten note saying the material might be of interest to researchers working on carbon amendment in legacy contaminated soils. She kept a copy for herself. She gave a copy to Rosario, who already knew everything in it, but who accepted it with both hands. She priced the document at nothing. If anyone asked what they owed her, she told them to test their soil and write down what they found. The city green space project was completed the following spring. It was the first of the 8 additional blocks that finished ahead of schedule, and the project manager, a different subcontractor hired locally by the city this time, noted in his completion report that the mulch product had performed to spec and that moisture retention in the planted beds had allowed a reduction in the irrigation schedule for the first 60 days that represented a modest operational savings. He used the word modest. Holt, in a brief note attached to the final payment, did not use the word modest. She wrote that the product had exceeded specification in every measured category and that the department would be issuing a standing request for the next fiscal year. By then, the 6 acres were fully amended and in production on 2 sections, with the 3rd in a second-year amendment cycle and the 4th being held fallow for the following spring. The conveyor ran from the intake bay to the screener to the blending area in a sequence that Rosario had refined 3 times until the labor input per ton was a number that Delia could divide against the revenue per ton and feel something she recognized. Not comfort exactly, but the absence of fear. She was 47 that year. Rosario was 32. They had been working together for 8 years. They did not talk much about what they had built, in the way that people who have built something through long labor do not need to narrate it to each other, because it is standing there in front of them, and they can see it, and they know exactly what it cost. Patterson came over in the fall and walked the property with them for the first time since the early years of derision that he had dressed in concern. He was older, and the concern had left him, or maybe the derision had, and what was left was something plainer. He stood at the edge of the oldest amended section in the low October light and looked at the ground. He did not say anything for a while. Then he said it was remarkable what good inputs could do to bad ground over time if you stayed patient. Delia looked at the ground with him. She did not say that patience was not quite the word for what it had required. She said that the ground had done most of the work. She said it in a tone that closed the subject gently, and they walked back to the barn. Her grandfather had written, near the end of his notebook, in an entry dated November of 1971, The sentence that she had not understood as a child when she first read it, and had come to understand completely by the 8th year of standing in cold chaff dust at 5 in the morning. The sentence said, "The patient ones do not wait. They work while others wait, and they call it waiting only because it takes longer than one season." That sentence appeared in the 22-page document she had printed and mailed and left at library desks across the county. It appeared on the last page, at the bottom, below the amendment tables and the processing specifications and the moisture retention data in the same careful slanted hand she had copied it from, because it seemed to her that it belonged there, that it was the part of the document without which the rest of it was only numbers. The city landscape report for that fiscal year noted, in a single line item in the materials section, that mulch costs had decreased by 14% compared to the prior installation year, due to local sourcing and reduced freight expense. 14% of $47,000 is $6,580, which is a sum the city used, according to the following year's Green Space Budget Report, to plant 43 additional trees in the corridor's final 2 blocks. 43 trees. That is a number Delia did not know. But the trees are there, and they are growing in amended ground, and the amended ground holds water through a dry summer and warms more slowly in a cold spring than the ground around it, and on the right kind of morning when the light comes low and flat across the corridor, the green of those 43 trees is a shade deeper than the green around them. And if you have spent enough years reading ground, you would know what that means, and you would not need anyone to explain it to you. What the earth cannot use quickly, it saves. That is what her grandfather wrote in a notebook that no one thought to keep, in a building where he mopped floors and listened. She kept it. She kept all of it, the notebook, the method, the work, the record, the result. And at the end of it, when the figure was documented, and the contract was signed, and the ground was what it was, she did not frame the contract on the wall or pose beside a pallet for a photograph. She printed 40 copies of what she knew and gave them away, and she went back out to the rows because there was still work to do, and the work did not care what year it was or who had finally decided to believe her.